With me today, my longtime friend and probably one of the most recognizable voices in Canadian
Wow.
broadcast history, especially if you're a country fan, right? Casey Clarke,
Wow, that's
wouldn't you say
wow.
so?
I don't know, man. I appreciate you saying that. I'm not sure I'm the right one to answer that though. But wow, that's great. Wow, I've never heard of it that way, but that's kind of scary when you think about it.
Well, I can't imagine anyone disputing it, especially in the country music space, given the fact that you've got the CMT background, which, by the way, we should full disclosure to folks, you and I met back then, like 1997, 1998.
Yeah,
You were being beamed into about 10 million households Canada
yeah,
wide at that point in time.
yeah,
Then you ended up back in radio,
yeah,
syndicated shows,
yeah.
50 to 70 stations at any given time.
Right.
Uh, and it just continues to roll for you.
It has been, hasn't it? I'm one lucky bastard. I mean, really, when you think about it, I've skated this long on, the level of talent that I've developed. I mean, that's oh wow, yeah, a lot of luck in there. And I do say that without searching for a compliment. There's a lot of luck involved in my career.
You've always wanted to be in broadcasting, and you knew that from a very young age. At about what age did you decide that this was going to be the career path you were going to take?
Well, when I was in high school, I have my first year apprenticeship in commercial art, and I thought I was going to go be a commercial artist. Then I wanted to be an art teacher. This was like late high school. And then a old girlfriend of mine said, "Hey, well, you like radio?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's kind of cool. Well, why don't you go to radio school?" And I'm like, "Okay." So I looked into that. I went to Columbia Academy for 1 year, dropped out and got a gig. And later, losers, like I was kind of gone and did that path.
And so you've really ingratiated and endeared yourself to the country music community. Did you always have the vision of ending up as sort of a staple from the broadcast perspective of being in country music, or did it just sort of end up that way?
We get back to that earlier comment. God, no, I was super lucky. I remember when this is my second tour of duty in Kelowna. The first tour, I was here back in '96, and even before I got here, starting out my career, I had like 3 major goals. I said I wanted to be on the radio in Edmonton, my hometown, then Vancouver, and then end up in Kelowna. And not necessarily in that order, but if I could get in that order, that'd be great. It I happened to get in all of that order before I think I was well, before I got to CMT, so I was 26, 27, and then I'm like, "Okay, great, now what?" When I got here, I thought, "Okay, this is where," and this is back in '96, "this is where I wanna stay." And it wasn't a country station back then I was at, but this is where I wanna stay, um, and then CMT called. And again, it was just because they were looking for a music director and I had both pop and country experience that they called me. It wasn't because I was this untapped talent that they saw all of this potential in. They just went down a couple of points that they were looking for. And at the time, Ted Kennedy, you remember Ted, who was our
Absolutely.
director of programming, he's like, "Oh, I know this kid in Kelowna. Yeah, he has some pop experience and he has some country experience. That's what we're looking for." And so he called me, and there I went. So, yeah, total luck.
And then you ended up on the air.
Yeah, again, total luck. That wasn't designed for me to be on television. I was hired as their music director, and one day, the production director at the time, Dave, was testing out some cameras. This is when we were in Calgary, and he was testing up some new equipment. And Davey and I, we would hang out together and have beers and such. And it was a Saturday, and he's like, "Hey man, can you just do a couple of stand-ups and stuff like that? Because I really need to test, the mic packs and this new camera." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." So we're just pissing around, and then Vicky Dalzell, who was our VP GM, came in on a Saturday and she saw the studio lights open and she's like, "What are these idiots doing?" And she popped her head in. And you remember Vicky, she's Alberta Strong, man. She's just so awesome. And she goes, "What are you guys horse shitting around in here? And what do you?" And we told her what we were doing. And then she said, "I want to see that tape on my desk before you leave." And I looked at Dave. I'm like, "Great. Now either one of us is going to get fired or both of us." Or so we leave the tape down. And then she called me in on Monday and said, "Hey," and Ted was sitting there. I said, "Hey, I think we could get you on the air introducing all the new videos of the week on the screening room. And it would be great because you're the music director. You could talk about the artists. You can do artist interviews when they're in town and then launch it. It'll be a half-hour show. What do you think?" I'm like, "Let's do it." Like, what do you mean? I go, "Yeah, okay. I don't know. I don't know anything about TV. I don't know." That's how it started.
There's something to be said for being willing to take on the challenges, when they present themselves
Yeah.
as
Oh, for sure.
opportunities a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
But still, every opportunity to some degree is generally a challenge as well, especially when you're talking about a professional context. And good on you for rising up to that and being so successful in that world. Now, as far as the industry is concerned, I mean, you got into Canadian country music when I would say when it was really to a degree still almost in its teenage and formative
Yeah.
years. And then it really started to rapidly evolve following the 1990s, the early 2000s. Now, of course, it's red hot. We've got
Yeah.
Canadian artists doing arena tours, doing
Yeah.
business, headlining festivals. You know, with a few exceptions, Shania, arguably Charlie Major, Paul Brandt during his peak, there were not too many Canadian country music
Mhm.
superstars in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, but that's really started to change. Um, Tell us a little bit about your experience with bearing witness to the evolution of the format and how that makes you feel today.
We would have a definite distinction between the Canadian sound of singles and the American sound of singles, and that was an ongoing thing for both CMT and radio. And our goal when we were at CMT was always trying to break that, get that gap closer and closer and closer. And and now not only is it so close, it's indistinguishable. You can't even tell the difference between the two. Um, and seeing that growth is amazing. You're right. When we started, there wasn't that other than Paul Brandt when at his heyday. You had then the Roadhammers kind of launched that kind of movement a little bit, and you definitely didn't have anybody in the female arena just yet that was
Other
laying
than
claim
Shania.
other than Shania and to a lesser degree, I guess Terry Clarke, to lay claim to that female country kind of pillar,
Yeah, and you
but
did have Michelle Wright a little before her, who did have a
little
number one
before
in the US, and Carolyn Dawn Johnson. There were some in the
there
mix.
was, you're right, but there's now you're seeing all these great female acts coming out that are competing at such a high level, um, where, yeah, back in the day, it wasn't there, and I think it's a great tribute to, I think, everybody that's in the music business right now, and probably the last, I'm gonna say, Jim, throw a number out there, last 7 years? Maybe even a bit more than that, that you've really seen, I think, the Canadian music country industry really mature and take a giant leap into that next level where you can't distinguish the sounds of a single from Canada or the US right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Megan Patrick releases a new single. It's every bit as competitive as a Kelsey Ballerini, or somebody at that level in the US. And yeah, it's interesting. I mean, as our industry starts to really find its legs and really evolve to a level where it's competing on a worldwide spectrum, um, there there are movements that infiltrate for the good or the bad of
Mhm.
the format, right? Whether it's inclusion, whether it's a focus
Yeah.
on gender parity at radio. Um, Talk a little bit about where you see those movements taking the format over the next few years, because it's a hot button issue right now, and I like to get people's take on it.
Boy, is it ever. I mean, I think country has been the last genre to actually wake up and kind of smell the times. And, some might argue we're not even there yet. And you're probably right in some circles, is that I think that's the new movement. I think the new movement is uh, a lot of equality issues that will get addressed. And, life is not fair. We get that. But it should be not fair equally. You know what I mean? It shouldn't be unfair for one person or another because of their skin color or gender. We all should be playing by the same rules. And I think in country music specifically, and listen, this is the only really format that I know really well, is that we weren't playing fairly for the longest time. And nobody wanted to address the white elephant in the room. We are now addressing the white elephant in the room, and we're getting better at having awkward conversations. And we're having those conversations more often than we ever have. And they're getting easier, these conversations. They're still awkward, but they are getting easier. And I think we're not afraid in certain circles to say, hey, I know that's what we used to do, but can we do it differently now? And I think people are now finding a way to do it differently. And we're seeing there's opportunities for anybody now in this format. Whereas, man, 7 years ago, 5 years ago, would we be having this same conversation? Probably not. And I think that's where the format's going. And I think, and I'm pretty proud to be a part of a movement and a part of an industry that's now following suit with society. You know what I mean? Like we're no longer this format over here, we're now blending back into a popular format like pop and rock and everything else. We're reflective of our surroundings.
So, what would you cite as some specific examples or even general examples of the country music business being tilted against minorities?
Well, I mean, you can see, who's co-hosting award shows now. That would have never happened 5 years ago. It's no longer A-listers. Mickey Guyton gets to co-host with Keith Urban. Um, you have Jimmy Allen on projects that you'd never see Jimmy Allen on. Kane Brown, you never see Kane Brown doing that. So I think we're seeing of people of color, people of gender, coming out. We're seeing full tours of all female acts. Outside of Lilith Fair, I don't know if and stuff like that. I don't. I've never heard of a country. And again, maybe there was one. I just don't know of it. That
Yeah,
was all
Reba
female.
did one years ago with her, Martina McBride, Carolyn Dawn Johnson.
Oh, okay, I
But
remember that.
you're
Right.
you're right. They're not. They were few and far between, and
Yeah.
now you're seeing more of like an empowerment movement. Um, Back to the examples you cited with Mickey Guyton, Kane Brown, Jimmy Allen. I mean, those artists, though, as well, have had a lot of success. Maybe take Mickey Guyton out for a second because
Mhm.
she's not had the level of chart success that Jimmy Allen has had, or Darius Rucker, I think, is another example that we can
Yeah.
cite. I mean, are those artists getting recognition and opportunities now because they happen to fall within a specific racial group? Or is it the achievements? Because it feels to me like Jimmy Allen or Kane Brown could make a pretty compelling case to be hosting any award show, even if they were purple or orange or blue,
Yeah.
like, you know what I
Oh,
mean? Like
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
the achievements and the metrics are measurable and they're there. So, what do you think it is? Is it this demand for inclusion, or is it we're just seeing more equality of opportunity and therefore you're getting more diversity as people rise up through the ranks?
Yeah. I think that. I think it's a lot of that. I don't know if it's one specific, category or combination, but I think those who make those decisions now are a bit more aware of the surroundings that they do business in, and understanding that business is not only white, it's also different colors and shades and backgrounds. Whereas, the old boys club, um, is no longer a thing. I mean, in the sense that I'm sure it is still a thing in certain circles, but if listen, if you want to move forward with a business, this old boys club notion is pretty archaic, and you really got to now seek other opportunities up and new audiences as well. I mean, um, so I do think it's a combination of a lot of things right now, not just one specific thing. I agree with you. I mean, these guys are overly talented, ridiculously talented, and if it wasn't for that, we're in a society now that is accepting of different opportunities. That level of talent is still there, but are the opportunities there?
Right.
Again,
Listen,
7 years ago.
I think the equality of opportunity, the focus on diversity
Mhm,
is all positive, and having the conversations are positive too. Where I struggle with it, if I'm being
mhm.
honest, is inclusivity versus tokenism. Right?
Yeah,
I
I get
think
that.
like that's where I have a problem sometimes, and I've had this discussion with other people in the industry. It's like, as an association, how do you morally, how do you, from a moral perspective, reconcile or justify including someone because of the color of their skin in order
Mhm.
to make your association look good versus including them because it's the right thing to do? And where do you draw that line, and how do you know the difference? Like that's something that I think as an
Yeah.
industry is a really awkward thing to talk about, but I think we have to talk about it because we have to know the difference between including people because it's the right thing to do, or including them to make associations, broadcasts look like they're checking the boxes. And in that particular domain, what we're doing is we're sort of exploiting those people of color.
Could be, but I mean, I think at the same time, you're using it's to the same example of exclusion versus inclusion, which is you're getting excluded because of your color, you're going to be included because of your color or gender or race. And I think you
But
could
if we
flip
made
that.
it all about measurables, if we made
Yeah,
it all
well,
about
yeah,
measurables and achievements, then um, I don't know. Like, would that solve the problem over time as we focus on equality of opportunity, or do we need to force it? And then when we do force it, like I
yeah,
say, I think it's an important conversation. When are we being exploitive to make an
yeah,
association or a broadcast look good versus when are we actually being doing the right thing?
yeah.
And
I know.
that's
But you
it's a
take
tough
about
one.
where you take, if we all agree this is the measuring stick, like the measurables, but then you can always make an argument of, okay, so am I going to get the opportunity to play at that level where I can accomplish and gain the measurables that you're going to measure against me to then determine whether or not I get the other opportunities? I mean, there's always that kind of layer of our, at some point, somebody has to say, okay, enough is enough. We just have to do this because this is something we haven't done yet for whatever reason, for probably all very bad. And let's see what this happens and let's see what this helps us do. Will it be perfect? Probably not. But is it status quo perfect? Absolutely not. So let's try this for a while and let's hopefully tweak it because now we're kind of more aware what's going on. And hopefully we can, mold it in a way it goes this way. I agree to what you're saying too. I don't think we do it for the basis of checking off some boxes. I think that probably does as much harm as it you think would do good. But I think we got to start doing things differently, though.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that.
Yeah,
And if this is part of an experimental run to sort of like figure out where the balance is, then I
yeah,
think we all have to be patient with that.
yeah.
But it's important to keep those conversations front and center
Oh,
as well, so
for
that
sure.
people who are being included go, wait a minute, are you asking me because of my achievements and my musical
Yeah,
ability, or are you
right,
asking me because I check a box for your
right,
broadcaster? Because
right.
otherwise, it starts to get into very strange territory.
Yeah,
And anyway, it's important to keep front of mind. And I think there was to a degree, maybe it was malicious, maybe it was non-malicious, but a bias in the industry. And I think to some degree it still exists. If if everyone who's a platinum selling artist in any particular industry falls into a certain category,
Mhm.
right? Then it is natural and normal to a degree for most of the industry to follow suit, right? Like, oh, we'll sign that person because they have a chance because they look and sound like this person.
Mhm,
You know,
mhm.
like we often see that in country music where labels will all start signing a bunch of hat acts,
Mhm.
or they'll
Mhm.
sign a bunch of, Keith Urban clones, or they'll
Yeah.
sign a bunch
Bro
of
country.
young male groups, right?
Yeah.
Bro
Yeah.
country. Yeah, we
Yeah.
see these cycles,
Yeah.
right? And now what we're seeing is a bit more of an emphasis on signing with diversity
Mhm.
um, as a metric, and that is parlaying into the tactics and strategies. So it's going to be really interesting to see
Yeah.
in the next year, 5 years, how that all pans out for the industry and where it takes the format.
Yeah, totally agree, totally agree. It's an exciting time. I mean, for both A&R people and for broadcasters and, you know, touring agents and production companies and everybody. It's just a very exciting time.
Yeah, without a doubt. I feel like the format has a broader base of appeal than ever before. And that's probably something you can speak to quite competently, given the fact that you've been around it for 25 years
Oh,
now.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
when you started in country music in the late 90s, there were the Shanias and the Garths, there were the outliers. But now it feels like there's maybe not stars who are quite as big at the stadium level, but there's more of them in
Yeah.
existence, and it's created a broader base of appeal to fans.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when, back in we were at Country Coast to Coast, the satellite radio network in Vancouver. You remember Shelley Frazier with "Crying, Loving, or Leaving," and I mean, country was just Alan Jackson, Vern Gosden, newcomer Randy Travis, newcomer Clint Black, but they all had that. It was all very traditional, very three chords to the truth. Uh, Country. I mean, it was just that honest kind of down home, great country music. Don't and I'm not saying that as a negative. I'm saying that as a positive. Now you're seeing, well, as we mentioned, you got bro country, you got still traditional country, you got a John Party can do a duet with Dirks Bentley and sound a little different. Dirks Bentley's kind of back and forth between the two genres. You have Brett Kissel who does a duet with Nelly. I mean, you have this ability now to have these different forms of the format that attracts a very young demographic. And for instance, particularly, female for us at least, where, our real hotspot is 25, 34. And then we kind of fall off on both ends a little bit. And I know a lot of dudes love their country and they're kind of back on the upper end of that, but we have different shades of our audience now where we never had those shades of the audience before. It was a very mature format in the sense that, unless you were either in a relationship or you were starting a family or you had a family, like the life group that country music used to have was over here. Now our life group is all over the place because we're singing about all over the place things in life. You're thinking about breakups and hookups and DMs, and you're singing about losing your I wish grandpa's never died. You're singing about weddings and funerals. So you're singing everything from here to here, whereas before we were way over here as a format. And so now man, all you got to do is go to Rock and River Music Fest or any festival for that matter in Canada, and that is just a very great snapshot of where the format is, because way over here you got your RVs, $120,000 RVs with your tent awnings and your 55-inch LEDs. Like, that's not camping, dudes. I mean, I don't get me wrong, I love that. Like, that's the way I would like to do it. But then over here you got Tent City. You got 19, 22-year olds, not a care in the world. They got Twisted Steel means sex appeal. You could bounce, bullets off of them. You know, and they're both at the same festival, and that's because
Yeah.
there's enough diversity in the entertainment of the lineup that will satisfy both groups.
I remember going to Dauphin in 1998, and it was one of the younger. Like at that point in time, it had quite a blend
Yeah.
of demographic, right? So you had your boomers there, and then you had your young people there. And I remember seeing all of these girls like in bikinis walking around. I was like, where do you put your keys, man? Like, where do you put your wallet? Like, I don't even understand how you're functioning on the grounds for 3 or 4 days. Just makes no sense to me whatsoever.
I don't
So
wanna
yeah,
ask,
it's
and mind you,
no,
I don't even wanna know.
it's none of my business, but it is a question worth pondering. Yeah, it's been really interesting to watch that demographic shift, to see how the diversity in the format has affected that. And then one thing that we didn't touch on is, there's this rock contingent now to country music,
Oh,
and
yeah.
Corey Marks is really on the
Yeah.
forefront of that
100%.
currently. But I think the Roadhammers really inspired that movement in Canadian country music, at
Yeah.
least. Hot off the heels of some of the Texas country artists.
Yeah.
I remember you interviewed Charlie Robeson back in the
Oh,
day. Do you
yeah.
remember him? Big
Yeah.
Sony artist, Texas country artist, really edgy. Uh, Probably kind of an asshole. Was he an asshole?
He was, you know what? He was really nice, married to, Dixie chick,
Yeah,
and
Emily
yeah,
Robinson.
yeah, and he was I think he was like 6'4". He was a giant of a man. Everybody's like Pat Green's tall. I mean, I was like, what is that? Well, it's Texas, but yeah, it was that.
Everything's bigger in Texas.
No kidding, right? Yeah, yeah. He's a little half Chinese guy from Edmonton. Great. So I mean, embodied that Texas alt country sound where it was just it was that you know, Corey does it, to the next level, and I think that's the graduation of definitely the sound, and I think that was refreshing, and I think that's another aspect of, the diversity of the format where you have that alt country-esque, level of output where you can have an artist like that, Pat Green, that man, you can tour. Well, this better than anybody. They can tour in Texas alone and make a killing. And because there's enough people out there that are fans that are willing to take that in. And I think, it's about time that part of the format gets celebrated as well as the other parts that have been growing too.
Yeah, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where Corey ends up taking this. We're still fighting the good fight at Canadian Country Radio, but
Yeah,
rock radio's on board. The fans are getting it. The streams are through the roof. At some
yeah,
point, I just feel like there'll be this groundswell where he will deliver the right song to radio at the right time, and
yeah,
radio will be poised and ready to jump all over it
oh,
because
yeah,
they'll know it'll work, right?
yeah,
And that's often my assertion in this business when it comes to being a trailblazer. And I know you have been a trailblazer for many an artist and many a song that a lot of people weren't willing to roll the dice on at the time. It's important to have those
yeah,
people in our business who are
yeah,
willing to go, you know what? I don't know why, but I get this.
yeah,
And I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to introduce it to the audience and I'm going to be a proponent for it.
yeah.
And have you had some rewarding examples of that you can cite?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. There's so many great artists that have given us the ability to be a part of that journey with them. And I know that sounds like a line, but man, I got friends as you do as well that they have boring jobs, boring careers, and they might be very good at them, ballers but to be a part of something that you help people do that is their passion work, and it's nothing other than giving them a chance is pretty good. Now I'm saying that and I'm trying to figure out who has been lately. I it's just been a whirlwind of stuff. Just trying to think lately with when Lindsay L first came out. And Lindsay, Lindsay L's been bouncing for a while.
Mhm.
And it
She
and
was a
it
blues artist for a long time.
right, and she was
Yeah.
bouncing for a while, and I've always been a huge fan of hers, and we jumped on stuff with Lindsay L very, very early, even before anybody else was really, even paying attention. I could have been because we knew of, her Western roots from Calgary and stuff when we were at CMT. And then shortly when we abandoned that and went exclusively back into radio into the syndicated realm. But she is an early example. Um, huh, and by no means is this anything on my end, but uh, both of the Tennille's, um, both are huge successes,
Tennille
and
Arts and
some
Tennille Towns.
yeah, where we were big fans of their music right out of the gate, and in fact, when they Tennille Towns used to hold her fundraiser in Grand Prairie, we would support that on a countdown level with CMT. We would actually fly in and help her do the fundraiser and be a part of that whole thing. And did she have a gazillion singles on radio? Absolutely not. She didn't. Um, but we were a part of it. The Road Hammers, when Jason McCoy, he kind of his career went dark a little bit as far as he wasn't doing a lot. And I remember having a conversation with him in a coffee shop, and he opened up his laptop and he says, "I want to do trucker music." And I'm like, "You want to do what?" Trucker music. Um, okay. And he had it. He had, "This is what I want to do." And then he says, "Do you think radio would play trucker music?" And I'm like, "Well, if they don't, they're dumb." And he went. He said we would support him with. We did the docu series on the building of the Roadhammers. Now it's a little different. There was a bit of a cachet name with him with what he's done in prior to that, but at
Yeah,
the
he had a
same
track
time,
record of success.
yeah, I mean, but it wasn't like a leap of faith, but in the sense he was diving into not a Chris Gaines, Garth Brooks, I'm going to abandon this format, go this way, but it was a risk for them to go, "Hey, listen, I'm going to make this band out of, pardon me, not nobodies, but Chris, Jason Bellamy and Chris Byers, I think it was, like no, they weren't household names." And to risk everything for him to say, "Hey, listen, I'm gonna abandon this and do this trucker album." And I'm like, "You know what? Let's see where it goes and let's have some faith and see if we can change things." Um, so yeah, I think we get too caught up right now in what we think the audience wants without really even knowing, without any market research. Because listen, nobody in broadcast right now can do it because, a lot of us can't because of the cost of it. Um, so we got to rely on what we think we know. And then you get, as you well know this, Jim, you get a couple of those what we think we know people in the industry. And then those people in the industry basically control the industry. And so if you're trying
Yeah,
to break a
but
new
that's
artist,
less of a factor than it's ever been with streaming, with social
yes,
media and other ways to
yes,
access the
if
marketplace. I mean,
yes,
that's
if yeah,
it's made things a bit more confusing for the consumer, but it
absolutely.
has given artists many more access points to directly impact the marketplace, and the net value of that is a positive.
If hey, listen, I'm a direct um a result of technology moving forward and mediums changing. We no longer need a exclusive video music channel. Some might argue that, but I think there are other venues and avenues to put music videos on that are equally, if not more powerful than conventional television. And I know it sounds like I shouldn't be saying that, but it's true. When CMT left and started doing other things, artists didn't stop making music videos. Like they didn't. And in fact, you could argue they're making even more of them because costs and all that other mumbo jumbo comes into play. But it's still a very valuable tool, and the avenue of exposure is so greater now than it has ever been, that ever than CMT, in Canada could ever achieve.
Now, a lot of people, let's talk about the CMT days a little bit because I think this is important to touch on for industry people, especially. A lot of people didn't really understand the fact that really what channels exist for is to sell advertising against their
Mhm.
content. right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
CMT was running music videos basically 24/7,
Mhm.
interspersed with commercial blocks. They started introducing more original content.
Yeah.
And then at some point, they wanted destination programming. They
Yes.
wanted half-hour sitcoms, hour-long specials that they could drive audiences to for a specific amount of time, measure that data, and
Yep.
sell it to advertisers.
Yep.
So a lot of people were like, I don't understand why they just don't have video flow, and that's how it used to be. But the video flow format didn't make for good business at the time.
Correct.
And I think a lot of people just don't understand that or realize that it's not the same as a radio station. You know, if you've got people tuning in and out all the time, then you really are ending up where your background noise. And if you have some
Mhm.
destination programming, you can pull in a few sitcoms, license reruns of Reba or whatever. At least you're tying something in that is near and dear to the heart of the audience and still draws in the eyeballs of fans and therefore the dollars of advertisers. Correct?
Absolutely. It was a like-minded we changed from a country music network to a like-minded network, and the content, was different, but the content never, at the time, skip off of that like-minded lifestyle content, meaning that we could go from a music video, from Brooks& and Dunn and then play, Tremors, and or we could go and play, Home Improvement, and then go back to Austin City Limits, and go back and forth and do that, and we did that, and yeah, I was there when we made the big flip from just all videos to then we introduced, documentaries on blues and jazz and, documentaries on folk, and then we went from there and
You
we
must have had a lot of pushback.
oh, man, people are losing their minds, and the big series that we launched was Reba, and when Reba came on and we got that from the US, we were the best suited, network for it in Canada, and interesting enough, we had Reba on CMT Canada years before the US had it. Years before, because I believe the CW had that in the US, and so CMT US out of Nashville never had Reba, and they were super jealous because 'cause they're like, "Man, we wish we had this series," because it blew up the network. So when Ted Kennedy, who was our director of programming at the time, he left, and we took over his position. He left the network in a great position where he just secured Reba. Then we brought in Dukes of Hazzard. Then we brought in Home Improvement. Then we brought in all these like-minded series, comedies, um, 1 hours, mostly, I mean, 2, half hours. Little House on the Prairie, if you can believe it or not, was a huge performer for us when we had it originally. And
Well, it hadn't been on the air for
yeah,
years.
for
Yeah,
years at
no,
the time, you're right, and then when we had that, so all of a sudden you would have noticed, and there was a condition to license, so we couldn't do the entire network that way back in the day. We could only do a portion of it, but you would notice after 6 o'clock Eastern that video flow kinda almost disappeared, and it was all destinational programming. We call it prime time, and that was the driving force financially for the network. I mean, our ratings back in the day, we were somewhere we were like 30, 31, 25, 54, and we snuck into the top 10. And for a network of that size, for Course Entertainment and for our kind of quasi ridiculous uh, programming where your video flow here and then your destinational programming here where everybody else was just destinational. That was a big feat. We understood that realistically, chances are we'll never be a TSN or a W network or history or stuff like that or HGTV. But for a little network like this, that was a huge accomplishment. And it made it gave Course Entertainment, a taste of the revenue possibilities of what could be. So, but yeah, at the expense of some hardcore video lovers for sure. And one of the things that's interesting to note in our research back in the day when we did it, and we needed it at the time, is that people said, "Oh man, you don't play enough live concerts." I said, "Okay." So when we started playing live concerts, people would disappear because people only like live concerts of the people who they like to watch. Meaning, we might play a live concert of Reba, but you might not like Reba, so you're not there. Then we'd have to play a live concert of Pat Green. Well, you don't like Pat Green, so you're not there. So unless they were like the top 10 of the format, the average person did not want to watch it.
Well,
They
and
would be
even COVID showed us like these these online concerts. I mean,
yeah.
with a few exceptions, a lot of them bombed because
Oh, yeah.
people want to go to the show. They want the
Yeah,
experience. They want to
100%.
grab a beer and stand in the audience. They don't want to sit in front of their laptop and watch a
No,
show from home.
no,
It's just not the same thing. So,
no.
yeah, interesting that the destination programming, and I doubt that you could get away with airing the Dukes of Hazzard today
No,
with the political
there
correct climate,
you
right? That Confederate flag on
you
the
could
General
not
Lee,
pay me
that
enough.
is not going to happen today.
You imagine it, dummy. What did you just do? Like,
Yeah. Yeah, you wanna talk about facing some, pushback, that would be
oh
some
yeah,
for
for
sure.
sure.
So you've interviewed hundreds of artists over the years, conducted some great interviews. Who did you find to be one of the most difficult, and challenging interviews that you ever, subjugated yourself to?
You know, the Dixie Chicks are tough, and I don't blame them. And this is back at the end of the Dixie Chicks, before they took a break and came back. So, and I don't blame them, but they were very, very guarded, very guarded. When we got them up, when they canceled their tour in the US, um, and they still had a couple of dates in Canada. We were in Toronto. We got them in Toronto, and they were very, very guarded, and it was an interview that was kind of awkward.
What year was
Um,
this, Casey?
2000 and what would that have been? 2010, 2000 and maybe even earlier than that,
So a few
2008.
years after the whole George W. Bush
Just yeah, it was about
situation.
a year after, right? It was about a year after that happened. And yeah, that so they were, they
Well, it
were
must have been before that because Obama became president in 2008. So
okay, so it was
it
way
would have
before.
had
I
to be
see, look
like,
at all
yeah,
those years are just
2006,
yeah,
2007.
yeah. So that was one. One that I was scared of is Dwight Yoakam. That I was scared in the sense because he's so smart. He's just so well spoken. So like, and I'm like, okay. And my tactic usually was to make them laugh. Get them off their artist guard and kind of relax them and just we're going to be. He's a guy who's pretty intense, and so going into that one, that was pretty intimidating, and
How
he's
did it
he's
turn out for you?
it was good. I mean, it wasn't the greatest experience I think I've shared with an artist, but it wasn't definitely the worst. Um, and it wasn't this yeah, ha, ha, fun, fun, fun interview because he's just not that kind of guy. Um, and so you know, when you're sitting down with him, you just kind of, he did an interview with Ted Kennedy, who we mentioned before. Ted has one of the smartest guys I've ever known in broadcasting and had no right of being in broadcasting, but he had a degree in physics. And I think he did broadcasting just to piss his parents off. And him and Dwight Yoakam went at it intellectually a couple of years before I got the opportunity. And that's probably why it really scared me because I saw these two guys go at it. And that was probably the only time I saw Ted Kennedy, who's one of the best interviewers I've ever seen, where Dwight Yoakam turned the interview around. And as an interviewer, that's the worst thing that can happen is that Dwight Yoakam now is interviewing Ted Kennedy. And you're like, oh my God, how did this happen? And they both had this piss and vinegar attitude towards himself. And so I remembered that then going into this interview with him, I'm like, I don't have the skill set. What am I doing? And it was fine though, but it was pretty intimidating. But you know what? For the most part, I would say 99% of interviews just go exactly the way you would love them to go. And I know they always say that about this format, but it is so true. It is just so relaxed and, laid back, and just I think it has a lot to do with the upbringing. And just the content of the music, and maybe, people around you. I mean, all those factors. But yeah, the very few interviews that I just walked away going, what just happened? You know?
Yeah, the Dixie Chicks exemplified sort of the first example of cancel culture, but from the
Yes.
right, not the left, right? Which
Yes.
today everybody talks about it being weaponized from the left side of the
Yeah.
political spectrum. But at that point, it was, how dare you question foreign policy? How
Yes.
dare you
Yeah.
question the invasion of Iraq, which of
Yep.
course years later turned out to be a sham. There were no weapons of mass
Yeah.
destruction.
They were
Um,
right.
they were right. They were
They
right,
were
and it is
right. Yeah.
heartbreaking. And I mean, I still stand by that as a good example of how cancel culture and that concept can be so dangerous, and it can be weaponized by any side of the political spectrum, and it's like that's a great example of the Dixie Chicks were right. They were right, by the way, to be able to express their opinion of a
Oh,
sitting
100%.
president, right? And the fact that they got blackballed by radio and
Oh, yeah.
banned by a lot of stations, and their albums were thrown away and burnt. It was just so heartbreaking to see, and just so brutal, and reminds me how ugly things can turn if you don't toe the line, and we still see examples of that today with artists, right? But that's a perfect example of one where at the time everyone felt very morally indignant and self-righteous that the Dixie Chicks weren't supporting the troops.
Right.
And now in hindsight, it's like, no, they were right. It was a
Yeah, and I
sham
think if
invasion.
if that would happen today, I mean, that they I mean, I don't think the same effects would have happened, the same results would have happened. I mean, it happened at a
How
time
so?
where, well, I think that you can still, I mean, look, we just went through an election where everybody was picking sides in country for the most part. And, John Rich was going this way, and you would see, uh, a lot of the country acts that said they weren't going, they were going. Right? They were going Biden, even though they didn't say they were. The reason of them saying we're going to stay silent, okay, Maren Morris, Biden. Um, you knew there was a different divide. To your point, I don't think you could have done that when the Dixie Chicks did it, or else country music would have shut off to you. I think now there's a greater acceptance of, okay, you can be a real person, and you can have as an artist, you can have things you want to say and things you believe in that might be different from me, but I still might enjoy your music. Um, and again, the political environment down in the US is way different here as well.
So divisive.
Um, right. So, I mean, it's just, uh, could
Well,
that,
you saw how badly Dean Brody got attacked when he posted a picture of him and Justin Trudeau a few years ago. It was just
yeah,
like absolutely brutal. And it's like,
yeah,
man, oh man, what I just don't understand why, and I think it's a very small, very loud segment of the population on the left
yes,
and right can't separate, like, hey, listen, you don't have to be a
yeah,
fan of Justin Trudeau's to be respectful and meet
yeah,
him, right? I mean, he's still the prime minister. It would be the same thing if you ran into Donald Trump. It's like you don't have to be his fan
no,
to at least be congenial in the moment, and but people like to talk tough and, oh, if I ever ran into him, I'd say this and that. And, those same fucking people would be starstruck and asking for a selfie, but that's beside the point.
100%.
What's been
One,
interesting lately is Eric Clapton has been taking a lot of flack because he had a bad experience with one of the COVID vaccines. I can't remember if it was the AstraZeneca or the Moderna,
right.
and I was sort of joking around the other day with somebody saying, "Oh wow, he had a bad experience with the vaccine. He talked about it publicly. I wonder how long till they start calling him a white supremacist." Sure enough, the Independent in the UK runs an article about how he has supported conservative politicians in the
Uh,
past, and it was just like it was so ridiculous. And Again, that's an example on the left that I don't agree with. It's like, hey, if the
Yeah,
guy had a bad reaction and he talks about it, that's his experience, man.
100%.
Like, you know, I don't hate him for that, and I
Yeah,
certainly don't not enjoy his music anymore. I mean,
right.
I'm sorry that he had it, but
Yeah,
I don't think he should have to lie.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, very
well,
strange.
you're absolutely right. The people can't separate the 2, which is bizarre.
Yeah. Well, that's a problem for us to solve on another day. I know you got to roll, my brother. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this and
I
opening
love
up.
this.
And
It's Thanks for
yeah,
the opportunity. It's always good to catch up, talk about old times and where we are today and where we're going tomorrow. And you and I go way back from Jimmy. You were my agent. You booked me all across
that's
Canada,
right.
and that I thank you for that. You brought many great memories to me in my career, and those were just great times. So I appreciate all the efforts you've done for me and my family specifically as well. So that was very, very kind of you.
Brother, it's been a pleasure. And
Yeah.
all the best to Susie and Maggie and Macy. And
Yes.
I'd love to have you back on some point if you'd like to do
Let's
it.
do it. Yeah,
Okay, man.
we're a road apart, that literally down the road from each other, about an hour. So yeah, I'm here.
Okay, this has been epic. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.